Okay, so we have quite a lot to cover in the food safety aspect for today. The idea is just to give a very broad overview of what food safety is, what we can expect to see in a food safety lab, what is the requirements of the lab, and what can we ultimately offer as a company for these customers. Okay, so if we look at food laboratories, what is their main objectives? So if you think you as a consumer, if you go to the supermarket and you pick up a product that you want to consume, you would like for it to be safe. You would like it to be free of any physical harmful material that can possibly harm you. So if you look at food laboratories, the main objective is to provide a quality product that is safe for human consumption. And when we're talking about safety, what does safety really mean? So, in layman's terms, if you think about safety, it's just about not being killed, really, if you want to put it that way. So, if I consume something, there won't be any harm connected to it. And another thing is when we're looking at safety in the laboratory, we can't just classify that as an opinion of a laboratory. There needs to be some regulation or some testing that can provide scientific evidence that this product is safe for consumption for the user. There is more or less 3 pillars if you're looking at a food laboratory that they test for. The first one is biological, where you will look at your bacteria, your viruses, parasites, molds. Then you have your chemical compartment that has your pesticides, your nutrient testing, drug residue, allergens, but then also very important, your physical pillar. So in a laboratory, you can have all 3 of these combinations or one or the other. It will just depend on what the sophistication of the laboratory is. Maybe it is a plant processing control point, and they'll most likely only look at the physical aspects of the food safety chain. So this is just 3 things that we can look out for, and will also give us clues on what to ask a customer. If they're doing physical inspection already, where are they doing their chemical inspection? Are they doing biological inspection, etc.? So as I mentioned, one of the drives for the need of a food lab is the consumer. You pick up a product in a supermarket and you look at the label. And if you're anything like me, you try to be very health conscious and maybe compare a few products with each other to see which is the healthier choice. Or maybe you don't care, but in a way, I'm sure you do, because you don't want to get sick or ill from consuming that product. So a food lab is there because a consumer will drive this. And in today's time, people have more exposure to a lot of information on Google. So they're more aware of what goes on in the food chain and the food processing chain. Other things that are very important for the food lab and for people working there being scientists, they look at regulations. So regulations can be national or it can be international, depending on what the lab's customer expectation is. So some of the customers would like to do exporting of their products. Then they'll probably need to comply to some international standards. Okay, so regulations, for regulations, there's regulations for food label testing, there's regulations for microbiology, there's regulations for food adulteration, as well as contaminants. And all of these can be national or international. Okay, and another drive for the food lab is the media. So we can all remember that time that we had the Listeria outbreak, where there was lots of jokes going around about bologna that nearly wiped out the population. So there's still ongoing outbreaks that you can still see in the media. So I put here 2 articles or news articles that I found on Food News that is global. And you can see the dates are all fairly current. The first one was, again, investigation of a mysterious Listeria outbreak. And one for today was Irish Salmonella that has an outbreak. Now, you might think that this won't be really relevant to South African labs, but do keep in mind that we have products that we import, all right? So you'll have control labs that will need to check for certain things that come into our country and on our shelves and racks. And then also very important for exporting, we also need to comply to certain regulations. Some of the vocabulary that I just want to make you aware of when you're seeing food laboratories is they will talk about food label testing or nutrient testing. And what do they refer to, and what can we evidently offer? Now, I don't want to spoil the surprise. This will come a bit later, but let's talk a bit about food labeling and food testing and nutrient testing. So typically, this is what you will see on your product. Your label has certain label claims. So if you look at the label that I put there as a example, you will see something like total carbohydrates, proteins, vitamins, fat, dietary fiber. These are all things that needs to be tested in a food laboratory. So for any product that's on the shelf, they will need to have these label claims tested at a food laboratory. Also, if they make any statement saying that it's allergy free, you will have allergen testing as well on that. And then there will be some regulation that they will need to comply to. So just for the sake of completeness, all the other parameters are listed here as well, but I don't really think that's relevant for us right now. Okay, the next thing that people talk about is microbiology, and this is probably one of the most important things that needs to be tested in a food lab, and probably one of the first things that a food lab will give action to. So there you will look at your pathogens like your E. coli, your Legionella, your Listeria. You can also have people doing investigative microbiology where they want to identify certain microorganisms or sequence some genomes as well. Then you have your molecular biology, microbiology, that is often referred to PCR. So for that, it helps in assisting any positively identified pathogenic microorganisms like your Salmonella, your Listeria, right? Then the last thing people will talk about is residue testing or MRL testing. Now, this can be very confusing, especially when you're sitting in front of a client and he tells you he wants to do MRL testing. So MRL testing is not a test. It's just an abbreviation for maximum residue limit allowable. And the tests that can be conducted under MRL testing is pesticides, mycotoxins, heavy metals, or antibiotics. So I did ask some of our colleagues in different departments to tell us a bit about what they can offer.
So this is just a general list of equipment that you would traditionally find in most food labs. So just your incubators, your laminar flows, autoclaves, fridge freezers, microplate readers, autodiluters, water baths, vortexes, and the list continues from this other perusal on the list. So the ones marked in green is actually the ones that we can offer from our portfolio. So generally all your new products, autodiluters, HPLCs, spectrophotometers, RT-PCR systems, freeze dryers, peristaltic pumps, etc. And so just from a summary of the brands that we can offer, obviously, like Heidolf, medical devices, Macharei-Nafel, New, Vivoqua, Martin Christ, VWR, Hamilton, Grow Scientific, Bio-Rad, Sykes, Ball Sciences, Hitachi, and Heidolf. So yeah, why food microscopy? So it's an important part of the quality control process in the grand scheme of looking at food quality. So it helps us to identify the food constituents in cooked meals. We can have a look at the ingredients, the additives, as well as unwanted substances. It can also help us to look at specifically microbiological examinations, such as pathogens that might be prevalent in the food sample, or alternatively visual inspection for any foreign material that's present in the food. So just the broad sectors that food microscopy is generally used in. This can be agriculture, specifically from the production level. I know there's a good example, for instance, with Citrus Research Institute. They look specifically at oranges and any other pathogens that you can normally find on the oranges. This can be bacterial, fungal, and alternatively on the agriculture side, there's a big scope for plant pathology. There's also a big scope for rhizobium research. So the guys looking at any legumes, the association between rhizobia and the host plant, the legume plants. In the food and the beverage manufacturing side, there's something to note here. Some of the traditional ones that we wouldn't normally think that you find microscopes. Guys that does syrups or alternatively sugars. So the guys like Illovo or your RCL sugar milling, also your Sugar Milling Research Institute, they also use microscopes. Then in your bottled water manufacturers, they also use microscopy. In your contract labs, the food and technology departments at universities, and then also your allied industries, such as your food packaging and custom. So just looking at the different contrast methods that we do have, there's 4 main ones that's mostly used. It's brightfield, polarization, fluorescence, and BIC, or in phase contrast. In the brightfield side, it's typically mostly used for your iodine, potassium, to stain starch in some of the grains. You can also have a look at some proteins and polysaccharides with a phthalidine blue stain, and you can also have a look at lipids. In polarization, this is mostly used for characterization of starch gelatinization or crystallization, and this is specifically used in spray-dried milk powders. So for fluorescence, this is mostly to detect microplastics in bottled water. And then for DIC, it has applications to look for fat droplets in milk or phase separation. So ice creams, yogurt, those type of. So just generally, this is the most applications that you probably would see in a food microscope setting. So mostly gram staining, gram-positive, gram-negative bacteria, fungal identification. So normally they would be looking at the protein structures or ascospores of your fungi to identify what specific species or at least at the genus level. Then the wine industry as well as your beer industry uses viability of your yeast cultures. That can also be used in a lot of the guys that does bread, manufacturers of bread or related products. As I mentioned before, microplastics in bottled water, foreign materials, particles such as plastics, metals, paper, found away in the food manufacturing process, and then also, as I mentioned, the structure of starch. So.
Okay, cool.
Thank
so I'll
you,
take
Francois.
over there.
Yes, thanks, Scott. Go ahead.
No problem. Okay, so obviously we were also the water techniques just to also give a way in as to some areas we can assist with. I think it's important for everybody to understand that several of these kind of workflow areas would be happening simultaneously all the time within any food safety testing lab. And where we as water techniques can obviously facilitate the clients are specifically in areas that have workflows and applications dealing with liquid handling, membrane filtration, sampling, and that includes plating and tubing, cleaning and calibrations, including your critical checks kind of equipment, environmental and water monitoring applications, air monitoring applications, typing, and when I say that I mean like gram staining, and also waste disposal and sterilization. And finally, on the micro side, specifically cultivation, enumeration, detection through a combination of your classical microbiological medias as well as real-time PCR options. Yeah, so if we break it up a little bit more, just to give you a bit more of a vision as to what sort of manufacturers might apply into each of these kind of sectors, application areas. Within liquid handling, we do have several manufacturers, namely Socrex, Herman, or VWR, that can offer us varied forms of pipettes, pipette tips, bottle top dispensers made of varied MOCs, repeater pipettes, pipettises, that sort of thing. Under membrane filtration, through Paul, Emin, and Roth combinations, we have multiple options that we can generate of combinations of filter manifold setups for MFT using magnetic filter funnels. We can get vacuum supplied. We can also offer the microfunnels or single-use option systems and more individual peristaltic pump-based systems like the Paul Centino, for guys that have lower throughputs or maybe not all the equipment in place. Coupled with that as well, we can obviously offer membranes like the Paul GN6 and other varied forms of membrane filters dependent on the application at hand. With plating tubes or sampling, again, if we refer to Paul, Herman, and Roth, we have multiple options with regards to sampling bottles, also your media preparation bottles like your shot bottles. We have access to some Petri dishes through local supplier as well for those that aren't aware. We could potentially offer that. The microfunnels themselves, some of them can actually also become Petri dishes as well. And then we have access to, your test tubes, the test tube racks, even parafilm to help us in terms of proper sampling, plating, tubing, when it's going into incubation, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's just a little bit of a summary of each of the items that I've just talked about there. If we look forward to now cultivation, enumeration, detection, we do have partnerships with DALRRD, Conda, Paul, Melford, and then Nuve, which already has been touched on by Francois. But we can obviously supply real-time PCR options with the IQ Check Prep. We have access to chromogenic medias if you're in export, for example, also from DALRRD. We have access to chromogenic medias and standard method medias from Conda if you're not in exports. We have access to ampule medias from Paul. Melford as well gives us all sorts of reagents, your carbohydrates, some stains, that sort of thing. And then obviously, like it's already been highlighted by Francois, we can also supply incubators. On the typing side, multiple suppliers there, Conda, Leica, Roth. They offer us combinations where we could do most of your gram staining type work. So, Conda does offer your gram stain kits, like obviously our microscopes, and then we can get all of our slides, cover slips, etc. through Roth. It's just one example. I'm sure Leica might even have that too. On the cleaning calibration side, we work with Inorganic Ventures, Hamilton, Alkanox, VWR, Roth, MN. They provide through Inorganic Ventures and Hamilton multiple options for pH and conductivity. From Alkanox, we have the Liquinox and Alkanox ranges for cleaning up of any glassware. If you need a phosphate-free environment, we can do that. From MN, we have the lab benchtop paper, which is commonly always forgot about, but it keeps your environment clean. Could be a big mover there. From VWR, we can supply DO meters, conductivity meters, pH meters, ISE meters. We do have a small portfolio of balances as well. We can get on a Roth, and coupled with Roth as well, we then have options for your thermometers, for your brushes that clean bottles, for all your general cleaning type of materials as well. That's just a summary of pretty much everything I've talked about there. So, okay. Then the next one would be waste disposal and sterilization. Again, we have Nuve and Roth that we can look towards. From Nuve, we can get all of our autoclaves. From Roth, we can get all of our autoclave bags and waste disposal bags. We can obtain autoclave tapes. We can obtain sterilizing indicators like SteriClin. We can obtain your biohazard bins. We can obtain your sharp bins, just to name a few things in that sector. In the sector of environmental and water monitoring is quite important as well, that all these, specifically these food safety labs, a lot of them are at production facilities, that they are also monitoring their impacts on the environment as well. And the water streams, which they obviously get fines from, but we have solutions from MN, Paul, Roth, Inorganic Ventures, in terms of standards that we can supply, equipment from MN for all your water analysis needs. We have for if they don't want to get as technical or as quantitative, we have test strip options as well. quite useful in the cleaning sectors, within these food production sites as well. Using the Quantifix Relax and your parasitic acids, etc. We also have access to TSS equipment through Roth and a combination of Paul, filter papers from MN, and then obviously all of your ICP standards to operate in ICP-MS for elemental analysis, or for your general environmental analysis needs there. In air monitoring, again, we have options from Paul, BIRAD, Conda. BIRAD offers the CP tenure in combination with Legionella kits to monitor for Legionnaire's disease. Paul offers a number of options as well to monitor for asbestos or dust. We can see there as well that we have options from Conda. Even when you consider the medias, you could use it for just settling plates as well within in a lab, or even in the production facilities themselves, to see how clean the environment is. And then that's pretty much everything I've talked about. Next slide, I think I might go to Herman now to check. Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. I'm going to ask Herman from Crom Techniques to give us an overview of these solutions.
Okay, thank you, Lara. So you would have seen from the video that there were quite a large number of chromatography systems in that laboratory, ranging from LC, LCMS, GC, and GCMS. So chromatography is fairly widely used. We'll go over them one by one. So first off, HPLC, or high performance liquid chromatography. That's typically used in food labs for amino acids, vitamins, aflatoxins, and preservatives. What we can offer for that is the Hitachi HPLC, where we've got the Chromaster and Chromaster Ultra, going from 400 to 1400 bar, really depending on the specific application, the budget that's available to the lab, etc. So we have a solution for that. Also, one of the applications for HPLC is mycotoxins, or aflatoxins rather. For that, we have a solution with the HPLC. So a lot of the times you don't want to necessarily go for LCMS to get the full range. Just doing the 4 aflatoxins mentioned here is sufficient, in which case you can do it with an HPLC and post-column photoderivatization. So, if you come across any requirement for aflatoxins analysis, just know that we have a solution for that. We've also got LCMS, so typically in food labs, LC triple quad would be used for pesticides, pet drugs, mycotoxins, food additives, etc. It's a really great, robust system that can go down to very low detection levels. EU regulations and US regulations typically always go down. So this is a really important instrument for food exports, because it measures a lot of the stuff that customers need to measure in order to export their foods to the EU and US market. So this LCMS is a really important piece of equipment for customers that need to export their products into these lucrative markets. GCMS is also used for residual solvents, flavors, aroma compounds, certain pesticides. The more volatile pesticides are done by GC and GCMS, as well as contaminants in the food. This is also encountered a lot in food laboratories. It's a high throughput item, and from our side, we can offer a lot of consumables both for these systems to keep them up and running. If we also look at the sample preparation, so typically the chromatography instruments, you can't just take an apple, throw it at a GC and hope to get a result. You have to actually prepare the sample. A lot of customers wish they could get an instrument where you just put a banana inside an oven and you press a button and it tells you what's wrong with the banana. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. So we've got a few solutions in order to prepare the samples for these chromatographic techniques. Quetches is normally the simplest one. It's typically used with LC-MS-MS because the MS-MS can do a lot of the purification work in and of itself. You just need to get the sample ready to basically go in there, and that's where Quetches comes in, because it's a really simple technique and it's fairly effective for what it is. We also have simplified liquid extraction. So if anybody comes from a lab and they've had to do liquid extraction, or maybe you did it during practical, you know what a pain it is. So we can offer the simplified liquid extraction. It's a Phenomenex product called Novum, just to make that process a little simpler for customers. It purifies a little better than quenchers, but it is a bit more work. And we've also got solid phase extraction, which is a great technique if you need to do proper sample preparation and really extract only the analytes of interest out of a complex matrix. Then solid phase extraction is the way to go. So what is quenchers? It's basically a two-step procedure where you extract your sample and the analytes that you want to analyze out of your matrix, which would be an apple or an orange or an avocado or whatever it might be. You basically extract the chemicals out of that, and then you clean up as the second step using dispersed SPE. Like I said, it's a very simple two-step process just to get your samples clean enough to go into the instrument. As you can see at the top there, there's a few EN and AOAC regulations that people refer to with regards to this, and then you just select the relevant quenchers kits based on the methodology that your customer needs to follow. Simplified liquid extraction, it's really just an automatable procedure where you load your sample in an aqueous solvent, and then you can collect your target analytes in a water immiscible solvent. So it really is just liquid extraction, but it's really simplified for customers, so you don't have to go through that whole painful process. It's a lot more accurate and reliable than having to do it manually. The last one is solid phase extraction. So it's basically a 5-step procedure where you condition the solid phase, you equilibrate, you load your sample, you wash off the impurities, and then you can elute the analytes of interest. So as I mentioned, it's a lot more thorough cleaning than quenchers, but it is a lot more work. It's a bit more expensive and a lot slower. You can automate the procedure a little bit using the vacuum manifold as seen in the bottom left of the slide. And then, you select your SPE manifold basically based on your matrix and your analytes of interest that you want to get out. It's got all sorts of different phases and things that you can choose based on exactly what you want to analyze and out of what sample you're trying to get that analyzed. Then in terms of GC, these are just a sampling of the columns that we can offer based on various applications within food safety. So you can refer back to this slide if you ever are curious whether we can do it or not. The answer is most likely yes. So if it's GC and it's related to food safety, we will have the column for it. In addition to this, we can also offer a full variety of consumables for GC and GCMS, including vials, septa, liners, syringes, gas filters, etc. for GCs. And LCMS, we can offer a full service solution with regards to everything from sample prep right through to the consumables used by the instrument for the various applications. So we can do columns as well as the frits, the guard cartridges, and everything else in between that they might need for their HPLC analysis or LCMS analysis. So as you can see from this, whichever of the 4 major chromatography instruments you may find in a food safety lab, we can definitely assist those customers.
Thank you, Herman. Okay, then just last few instruments from robotic side, the analytical instruments. So if you look at nutritional analysis, if you can remember to the first slides, looking at the label, there's some protein content that people refer to. So typically we will go to our nitrogen analyzers there for that in the Elementor brand. And then for label claims, you can look at your SciEx triple quad systems. As Herman mentioned, a lot of these applications can overlap with the HPLC. So it will just depend on really what the workflow is for the lab and what their capabilities are. A lot of labs start out with HPLC and later migrate to LC-MS, and that is just starting off by having your nutritional testing and later doing your more sophisticated analysis, which is a bigger investment to invest in, more expensive tests to do, and also your laboratory training or taking your analyst from HPLC to LC-MS as well. So that's usually your next step, going from HPLC to LC-MS on that. So you can do your allergen testing on a LC-MS. You can do vitamins on it as well, but you can do that on the HPLC. And then your adulteration. So your adulteration will be, say, for instance, you're using olive oil, just to make sure if it claims to be 100% blend of olive oil, that there's no sunflower oil added to it or canola oil. So a label claim application there. And then your chemical contaminants. So there's really solutions from sites going from farm to fork, basically, looking at your suppliers, your testing labs, your manufacturers, and your regulators. These different solutions for whatever you need to identify, even if it is ingredient QA or QC material, raw material, to a testing lab where they need to test certain label claims or make sure that there's no contaminants in your sample, like mycotoxins or pesticides, your manufacturers and your regulators. So these are all the solutions that SAICS can offer from there. What I did fail to mention and have a slide on is Herman talked about SPE and automating SPE. So for that, you can look at Hamilton. So if it's a really high throughput food lab, we can look at automating that by Hamilton and the solutions. And there's also a smaller robot there called the ML Prep that can help with preparations in a food lab. And then another thing that's very important, especially when looking at your instrumentation, is your after-sales support. We have an excellent service and application team. So that's all from my side. There's still a few minutes left for some questions.